we've worked to ensure that it is a culturally attuned, useful and also reliable outcome measure. And it's also about a holistic view of health that recognises the perspective of the Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, but also the important perspectives of tangata whaiora, whānau, clinicians. In the beginning, though, Hua Oranga was established in recognition that it's important, of course, to have outcome measures that gauge the effectiveness in treatment and care, but also that measures of effectiveness also needs to be dependent for us here in Aotearoa on Māori perspectives of outcomes and also Māori approaches to treatment and care.
I guess one of the challenges we faced in the early days was this whole idea of outcome domains, actually what to measure in terms of a mental health outcome measure for Māori, in terms of mental health outcomes that were relevant to Māori, could be clustered under 4 broad domains. A lot of people were keen on the proxy approach, but the tangata whaiora and whānau seemed to think they're somewhat left out. So we thought we might adopt a triangulated approach to outcome assessment, measure health outcomes across these 4 domains here, and have a look at outcomes, mental health outcomes from 3 different perspectives.
The Hua Oranga project was guided by a kaupapa Māori philosophy, and it was also aligned to the process of pōwhiri, of engagement and participation with the research participants, and also premised on the philosophy and understanding of respect and responsibilities within that. When we approached them, they said, yeah, sure, because that's our kaupapa. Our kaupapa is about supporting whānau. Our kaupapa is about supporting people who come into our services. The clinician who facilitates, actually, who supports the process. Because the process is actually about the tangata whaiora, the person who's accessed the service. And so the facilitation was to ensure that the tangata whaiora, the person who's accessed the service, has a say in their care and treatment. And that the whānau also of that tangata whaiora also had a say. The clinician also had needed to be experienced in the whare tapawhā, the model, the holistic model of a Māori worldview and working with Māori. Now, there was also a discussion around, well, what is whānau? And, you know, there's a broad statement about what is whānau. The definition I think we generally went with was a blood relation, a whakapapa, to the tangata whaiora. But also there was an acceptance that some whānau were actually away from their haukainga, they were away from their iwi, their tribal roots. So, and they had formed relationships with their flatmates, or a club or a group that they had become a part of. And so they became their whānau within the Hua Oranga administration.
People want to know whether it has any credible psychometric properties. And the qualitative data that Kahu was referring to gave us very strong indications of the utility of the second version, option 2. There's a measure of reliability and indeed a measure of validity about this type of instrument. So we think that the qualitative and that quantitative information shows that this instrument has got usefulness or utility, usefulness according to all the people who were trialling it and the feedback that they gave to Kahu, and that the whole original concept with the 4 dimensions has stood up to this type of examination.
So in conclusion, we've shared a bit about the journey of Hua Oranga, and particularly over the last 18 months, and the final stage of refinement before it becomes available nationally in the new year.
A highlight for me was then yesterday the launch of Hua Oranga, the Māori outcome measure, which has had a very long gestation period, but that now at last is going to be out there, and albeit perhaps a bit slow in implementation, but it is there.
Well, it's important because these sorts of measures can be so central to improving services. They can allow focusing the treatment or the management efforts onto the things that really count, and so this measure broadens the scope and so addresses a lot more aspects of a person that they would think need addressing.
I think it's a commitment to biculturalism in this country, so that this gives life to that commitment.
Yesterday we saw some fabulous work. I was so delighted to see it come to fruition on the Māori mental health outcome measure. So there's all the one-off studies, and now they've got a measure, and now comes the hard bit, which is that the measure has to sit within a system, and that system involves training and IT and data collection protocols and processes and all that sort of stuff. And then when they've got that, they can actually start measuring performance with it, and then giving people feedback, and then based on that feedback, starting to benchmark to say, gee, your service is doing better than yours, why is that so? And what is better? Let's use this information to identify best practice, and then you evaluate and you refine your measures. So even though yesterday was a fabulous day because it was the launch, it really was just the very beginning of that big process.